Snaps good, holds good, kick on the way by Conradi, end over end, and it is good! Kyle Conradi hit a 54-yard field goal, and Iowa State leads it 20-19! Oh my goodness!
What's up, everybody, and welcome back into another episode of the Iowa State Fan Perspective here at Play the Fight Song College Football Show. My name is Jake. As always, I am your guys' host tonight, and welcome into another Summer Series episode of Get to Know the Opponent. We bring in the best fan perspectives to cover Iowa State's 2025 schedule. Tonight, we go down to the second to last week of the season. Late November, we bring on the Kansas Jayhawks. No better to cover Kansas for us than my guy, Derek Johnson, tonight. He is the host of the Locked On Jayhawks Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You can find Derek on X at DJohnsonRadio. Derek, appreciate you joining the show tonight. We ready to talk a little bit Jayhawks football?
I am so jazzed, man. We're getting so close, and it being week 0, obviously that's something that you guys get to have as well. Like I love it because it's just 1 week closer, right?
It is, and it's kind of time to get rolling. I'm sure that you guys, especially yourself, are kind of immersed in hoops. Like hoops probably talk never stops in Lawrence, but I'm sure like week 0, you guys are probably turning the corner. You're like, it's kind of Fresno State time. Pretty close, right?
Yeah, I think once fall camp starts here in a couple weeks, like that's going to be like, okay, it's starting to turn. But yeah, still right now, it's funny. I mean, it's still KU basketball off season. Yeah, it really is. And I try to mix in football stuff that we're talking, but the listeners want what the listeners want, and that's always going to be a thing with KU with basketball.
I will save that question towards the end because I do have a little interest on where kind of the state of Kansas athletics is at. But before we get into all of that, we're always partnered by our friends at No Rivals. Shop NoRivals.com, the best hats in all collegiate sports. Got my Iowa State edition hat on tonight. Use the code PTFS at checkout for free shipping. We love those guys. But Derek, this is the fan perspective, so I got to ask you first, like, take us back. I know you cover the Jayhawks for your podcast, but where does your fandom start with Kansas, and how did it lead to where you're doing now?
Yeah, so I kind of lived all over growing up. Eventually went to high school in Southern California, and I made my way out to the University of Kansas for college. It was actually cheaper for me to go out of state and wind up in Lawrence than it was to stay in state. Got a scholarship, went to KU, graduated in 3 years, and then I was off to the job world, and I guess kind of around the KU world of things and the Jayhawk life, so to speak. And from then on, it's kind of been history. So that's kind of how I started. So a little bit different path. It wasn't the, grew up a Jayhawk fan all my life or anything, but it's a big part of my life now.
I got to know, it's like, yeah, somebody who comes from California to Lawrence, Kansas in the Midwest, maybe for one of the first times in your life, like what makes Lawrence so special? What makes KU that awesome that you kind of stuck around and you love still talking about it?
Yeah, I think that like you think of like Kansas, and I'm sure this is the case, like for people, especially like the new schools in the Big 12, if you're from Utah or Arizona or something, you might think a lot of these schools in the Midwest, whether it's an Iowa State, whether it's a Kansas, whether it's an Oklahoma State, that it's just going to be like out in the boonies, that it's going to be out in the plains. And it's like, yeah, if you're driving through the state of Kansas, if you're driving through Western Kansas, if you're driving through the state of Iowa, sure, there's going to be a lot of like not much to look at. There's going to be a lot of or cornfields, but the specific towns where the colleges are awesome. They're college towns. They're centered on the school. A lot of school spirit going around. There's a lot of like local types of shops and places to eat. It's not a lot of like chain restaurants, and it's a homey type of feel. And you kind of get that Midwest attachment when you're out here. And I think that's true for a lot of the schools in the Big 12. And I think that's what makes the conference so cool.
Well, Kansas specifically, I mean, let's start with the football team. Like, let's start with the new stadium. I think there's a ton of buzz around it. I think it looks great. I guess you want to call it a new stadium, but more of a renovation, I guess. But you're still adding a ton of new features. Like, I'm sure Kansas fans are excited to get in the seats on week 0. Like, where's the hype with this new stadium? Is everybody pretty jacked up about it?
Oh, extremely. I mean, especially after you go last year to where you're playing in Kansas City, which had certain perks. You're playing in a pro stadium, but you're having to go so far away. And like, I think it makes you realize a little bit more how much you miss having, just being right on campus.
Right.
the part that's cool. So you actually have the graphic up there with what the field looks like. If you see the in-person pictures of because you can kind of see the wheat behind the Kansas in the end zones.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't do it enough justice, in my opinion, because I think on that it looks okay. It's kind of a cool like spin to it. If you see it in person, I'm telling you, it looks even cooler. So I think people are super psyched about this. I mean, it's obviously something where it was needed for a long time, needed a lot of patience. If any Iowa State fans had been down to the games, you might notice that hey, there's a lot of like porta potties, and bathroom situations weren't great, eating situations weren't great for home games and stuff. That stuff's going to be fixed up. Now, still one half of the stadium is still going to be, more of the old stuff. But
Yep.
the bowl, the other side of the stadium, I guess that'll be the west side of the stadium. Like that's all going to be new. The jumbotron's going to be new. The surface is going to be new. They have kind of a wheat-like structure that they're calling it, of like the lights that they're going to have, because when Kansas scores a touchdown, they call it waving the wheat, and it's going to allow
Sure.
do that sort of thing. You're still going to have the cool picture of it. I do think Kansas has an underrated, like picturesque stadium. If you look at it from the vantage point of through the video board to the Campanile, where the hill is right behind the stadium. And so, yeah, man, fans are jazzed up for this. I think it's going to be really exciting to see that first game there.
I went in, man, what year was that? 2019, I think I went down there, and I do love the wheat end zone touch this year. So I definitely going to have to make another trip to Lawrence here very soon. But let's get to the actual 2025 football team, because I think this is a super interesting team. 2024 was obviously a very wild year for the Kansas football team. At times, you start 1-6 and you look like one of the worst teams in the Big 12, and then quickly 3 ranked wins, and you look like probably, if you would have put that team in Dallas in December, they definitely could have competed and or beaten Arizona State. They looked like one of the better or best teams in the Big 12 at one point. So, like, what's the vibe with the fan base? Obviously, you ended on a pretty good note. Obviously, the loss to Baylor was a little disappointing, but you got to feel like there's an energy and a buzz kind of building just based on the back half of the schedule last year.
Yeah, definitely nice to get some momentum there. They really wanted that bowl for the extra practices, but outside of that happening, about as good of a back half as you could ask for. And like you said, you beat 3 straight ranked opponents. And if you look at it, the Big 12 standings, obviously there were 4 teams that were tied for first at the end of the day, including Iowa State with Arizona State, Colorado, and BYU. Kansas beat 3 of them, and the other one, Arizona State, they lost to by 4 in Tempe, and that was a game they were up by 3 with 2 minutes to go. So, like, they could have very easily beat all 4 of the top teams in the Big 12 last year. I think that gives you hope coming into this year that you say, okay, if you can just, like, not be as disastrous over the first half of the season, if you can maybe have a little bit better luck in one-score games, like I think that's going to be a little part of it too, because they started the year 0-5 in one-score games. They finished 1-5 with the BYU win in there. If Jalon Daniels can, not be as rusty to start the season, if having, no longer having Jeff Grimes, their offensive coordinator, and having a guy that Jalen's more comfortable with, if that helps him overcome some early season woes, then maybe you're back to a point where, okay, I think the first goal is make it back to a bowl game. Like that's something you want to get accustomed to year in and year out. I think the next goal from there is, the over-under win total for them is 7.5. Can you get 7 or 8 wins this year? I think internally along the way, can you beat one of your rivals, with Missouri or Kansas State? And then at the end, it's kind of like, okay, I don't know that I would put the expectation to say, can you make the Big 12 title game? But I don't think I would prevent that goal from like any team in the Big 12 after what we saw Arizona State do last year. Right. So like to a certain standpoint, it becomes, okay, just keep chugging along week after week. And then if you get to, your 10th or 11th game of the season and you're sitting there at 7-2, maybe we recalibrate those expectations and we go, okay, maybe you can, make it down to Arlington for the Big 12 title game. But I do think people are optimistic because of the combination of, what Lance Leipold has done here, the back half of the season, the fact that you did beat a lot of the best teams in the Big 12. And I think just in general, I would imagine most fan bases feel this way in the Big 12, which is kind of the beauty of it. After what Arizona State did last year, everybody has hope.
Yep, exactly. I think that's very well said. And I really do like there's the case though that Kansas is a legitimate dark horse, and I definitely see where they're coming from. Now you lose big pieces like Devin Neal, a lot of those wide receivers, but probably the most important piece you could ever bring back if you're a college football team in 2025 is a veteran quarterback. And I don't think you have much more of a veteran than Jalon Daniels, who finally plays a full healthy season under his belt last year. You finally get him back. You promote, is it Zabrowski as offensive coordinator? Okay. So you get Zabrowski, like you said, Grimes is out. Clearly Daniels is more comfortable with Zabrowski. So how does Jalon Daniels go back to being that preseason Big 12 player of the year a couple of years ago? How do we get that Jalon Daniels back for a full 12 games if you're a Kansas fan?
Gosh, that feels like so long ago. It's funny because you mentioned like we finally got the healthy season. And that was always the conversation. Last offseason, the offseason before, it was always, can Jalon stay healthy? And I remember even having conversations like, would you take 10 healthy games if I guaranteed that for you right now from Jay? Like, and we got it. And then it was the worst season of Jalen's, I guess, outside of his true freshman season when he was like 17 years old in 2020. But now the question becomes, can he be more consistent and can he be the guy we saw for the back half of the season? He was definitely uncomfortable the first, 5 games or so of the season last year. And he had more interceptions than touchdowns in those first 5 games. He finished back more normal to the guy we were used to over the final 7 games. What are the reasons that could have happened? Well, one, weird things happen in sports. I think number 2, though, which is maybe the more likely scenario here, is he had injuries, even though it wasn't during the season, that prevented him from playing in spring ball last year and summer workouts. And so he actually had an injury this year that kept him from spring ball. That's a little scary. But the positive is it did not keep him from summer practices. And so you look at last year, the beginning of the year, clearly there was some sort of rust he had to shake off, right? Not getting to throw to his receivers. And some of the receivers had injuries in fall camp as well that they were struggling to kind of get on the same page. Well, this year he flew all his receivers out to California to throw with him. So there's a little less rust to shake off. Additionally, the offense coordinator thing, like Jeff Grimes has never really fit into what KU wanted to do. And there was clearly like the thing with Jeff Grimes, like he wants to throw like with receivers, they want to stretch the field vertically. And that wasn't the personnel that KU had. Like they had route technicians and like intermediate receivers. And it was just way different with Andy Kotelnicki. And at the time, Andy Kotelnicki, who is now the offensive coordinator at Penn State, when he was the OC at KU, it was Jim Zabrowski, who was the quarterbacks coach at Kansas. And Zabrowski and Jalon Daniels are super tight, like super good relationship. Well, Zabrowski now gets the offensive coordinator job. They bring Matt Lubick back, who Matt Lubick was an analyst with the team a couple years ago and started them running this whole like kind of spread option type of offense. He's the one who instilled those principles. He had backgrounds with like Nebraska and Oregon and some of these schools, brought that over. He goes to Nevada. Now he's back with Zabrowski. So it's a much more comfortable situation for Jalon Daniels between the play calling, between just having some offseason to work out. And even though there's less continuity with the skill players, I think there's going to be more speed from the receiver room. I'm not going to expect the running back room to be as good as what Devin Neal produced, but I think there's reason to believe this could be a good year for Jalon Daniels as long as he can stay healthy.
In college football in 2025, when you get new roster changes and new coordinator changes, you know, I've done a few of these, and you ask some of these other Big 12 schools and they get a new offensive coordinator and they're like, I really don't know what this offense is going to look like, but there's familiarity with this guy and Jim Zabrowski. So like, as an Iowa State fan perspective, like, is this going to be more pass heavy? Is this going to be run heavy? Like, what should we expect from this new Kansas offense?
Yeah, the beauty of this one is that so when Lance Leipold was at Wisconsin Whitewater, when he's winning all those national championships, Zabrowski was actually his first offensive coordinator. He eventually left for a bigger job and then, eventually regrouped with Leipold later on. And so he's just been along with him for a while as the quarterback's coach. When Kotelnicki left for Penn State, we got to see Zabrowski calling plays in their guaranteed rate bowl victory. And so it's easy to make the comparison because if you remember at the beginning of last year, Kansas loses at home to UNLV. I forget the exact score. It was either 23-20 or 20-17. Point being, they didn't put up like a ton of points necessarily. Kansas put up like a 50 burger. It was 49-36 against UNLV in the guaranteed rate bowl just a couple months before or several months before. And that was with Zabrowski as the offensive coordinator. He was the one calling plays with Kotelnicki out. Kansas threw it all over the field that game. They had 3 receivers who went off. Jason Bean had like 500 passing yards. It was an incredible performance. I don't know what to expect in terms of the balance. Like Kotelnicki was always a little more run than pass. I think it'll be probably a pretty even split. The thing with Kotelnicki's, he liked to use a lot of tight ends. I don't know if the KU roster is going to behold on that, but it's still going to be similar. Like I think you'll see speed option stuff or spread option stuff. You'll still see the wide zone, which those have been principles for them. You'll see more of the motion stuff and the intermediate route stuff. But I think this will be like, it's not going to be like the Jeff Grimes offense, which is a lot of airing it deep or throwing screens or jet sweeps, but it'll be kind of a variation of the Kotelnicki offense we saw a couple of years ago, which is kind of funny because I think from the Iowa State perspective, there might be Cyclone fans being like, wait, what do you mean? Like this is because the Andy Kotelnicki offense actually didn't have a ton of success against the Iowa State defense, but last year they did with Jeff Grimes, which is kind of ironic.
Do you think, I always wondered about that. It was crazy. And Daniels, that was probably his best throwing game, I think, all year, you'd say, right? I mean, he was just throwing it all over the field. And at that point, was it more of a Leipold offense, or was it expected that Grimes was going to stay throughout the entire year, or was it kind of like you think they were going to move on at that point?
Lance Leipold is loyal to a fault. I think in a majority of situations, it's a good thing how loyal he is. Like 90% of situations, 99% of situations, it's a good thing. There were Kansas players before he took over that like had 6 position coaches, like that's a good thing that you have continuity now. But that was one of those situations where it's like, they need to do something. They need to make a change. And it ended up happening at the end of the year. But there was never really talk that it was going to, change in terms of would he actually do it. I think what might have happened, and there was some scuttlebutt like this might have, I don't know if it did or didn't, but like during the bye week, which I think was before the K-State game, which actually kind of coincides with when Jalon started to play better. It seemed like they kind of had a meeting of the minds. Like maybe there was more collaboration in there between, Zabrowski and some of the other guys on staff with Jeff Grimes to try to get them to play more to the suited strengths of the guys that they already have, as opposed to just kind of being, you have full whatever you want to do, Jeff Grimes for the first half of the season. So I don't know what would have happened, honestly, if he wouldn't have taken the Wisconsin job. Would Kansas have moved on from him anyway? I don't know. That would be a very interesting question that I'd love to give Lance Leipold some truth serum and see what he would say.
Kind of feels like it just bailed him out. It feels like Kansas fans have a ton to be excited about with this Zabrowski offense. So let's get to like the skill positions. Obviously, you lose big guys like Devin Neal, who's one of your all-time leading rushers, Grimm, Arnold, a couple of just stud receivers. So I know you get a little familiar with Highshaw, and I think that's going to be nice for Kansas fans and encouraging. But I think there's some new faces that should have fans excited about, right? With like this receivers and these running backs.
Yeah. I mean, running back, like you said, it's impossible to. Devin Neal is the all-time leading rusher in Kansas football history, and that's a school that has Gale Sayers and John Riggins and a long list of like. Kansas football history isn't the best history, but the running back history is pretty good. So it's something to lose Devin Neal. But yeah, I mean, Highshaw, LaShawn Williams, who they added from Iowa, like they should at least be, decent in the backfield. Receiver one is interesting because from a production standpoint, you lose like everything. And so it's hard to look at it and go, oh, are you going to be better? I think potential wise, ceiling wise, they are better because the big difference is like you add Emmanuel Henderson. He was the receiver 4 for Alabama last year. He came in as actually like a top 100 recruit in the country as a running back, eventually moved to receiver, and it's one thing to be a receiver 4 at another school, but like it's another, okay, well, if you're a receiver 4 at Alabama, you're behind Ryan Williams and, some other really good players that could be first round draft picks. So it's a little bit better. The talk is that he's been killing it so far in the offseason and that he could be the fastest player on the team. I think he could be the best receiver we've seen in the Lance Leipold era at Kansas. And so that inherently, you bring in a bunch of other transfers. You have a couple other guys coming back who are going to play probably bigger roles. You brought in like 4 freshmen coming in. I don't know if any of them will play, but even though there's not the continuity with the receivers this year, I think there's actually more talent overall. I think there's more players that can make you miss after catching like a slant pass and can, turn an extra 15 yards, yard after catch. Like, that was the one thing, like as good as LJ Arnold and Skinner were, and Luke Grimm at making contested catches and at route running and at just making these circus catches, they weren't really guys who would, get yards after catch very often. And they weren't really guys that you could throw like a simple route to, and then they could just make something happen. I think they're going to have more of that on the team this year.
I got to ask for Iowa State fans, is Deshaun Hanukkah, is he your number 1 tight end this year?
Yeah, yeah, and that's one where it's he might have been the number one tight end last year, honestly, but he
Did get
tore his
hurt. Yep.
Achilles in spring ball, and so I mean that's a big question mark is the tight end room because you go from having Mason Fairchild 2 years ago, who he was a solid tight end for you. Last year you had Jared Casey, who was all Big 12 as a fullback H back type. And now it's like Deshaun Hanukkah hasn't played on a real football field in the game since 2022. And the talk has been that last offseason he was killing it and that he's coming back from the injury well so far this year, but there's not a lot of depth at tight end. They actually had a tight end transfer in from Arizona and then transfer out. He transferred in before spring ball, transferred out at the end of spring ball. Kansas plays Arizona later this year, so that's another storyline. Like, is he going to give him the playbook and stuff? But
Yeah.
Hanukkah figures to play a really big role on this team.
I thought he did a lot of good stuff for Iowa State. It's just kind of one of those things. If you don't get the number one spot in college football, you go and try and find a better spot for you. So I think Kansas fans should be excited about that. Let's flip it to the other side though, because another coordinator change, another coordinator upgrade promotion, and another Iowa State familiar face in DK McDonald. I think he was the secondaries coach at Iowa State in his time under Matt Campbell. The defense is something that I think needs to be improved upon if you are Kansas and you're looking to be that dark horse in the Big 12 this year. So what can we expect? Like, what should be priority number one to fix on this defense if you're DK McDonald in year one?
So I think it really is a little bit of everything. The whole idea of bringing on a guy, and I know there was a stop with the Eagles in between there from Iowa State, though, is very appealing because you're talking about somebody who, I mean, for my money, Iowa State is the bar. They are the standard of what the best defense consistently in the Big 12 is. Like, sure, maybe there's some seasons where Kansas State has a better defense or maybe Utah will have whatever, but like consistently, Iowa State's like top 25 defense every year. And like, it's not that they do it with less talent. They've produced a bunch of draft picks, especially at that back end, that secondary, but they're not doing it with as much talent as like 1 through 11 as maybe like a Texas or an Alabama
100%.
And so I think that is very appealing. Like, what can he do? Now, I'm very interested schematically because Iowa State plays this like 3-3-5. Kansas typically was playing a 4-3. Sounds like they might kind of hybrid it out and might be more of a 4-2-5. Or is that just something that, I go back to 2022 and Kansas was very quiet about using the triple option and speed option concepts and stuff like that. Ended up being a big part of their offense and still is to this day. There's a part of me that wonders, are they going to hide something on defense that we won't find out until like the third game of the season that okay, this is now a big thing for them. I think the other encouraging part there is that the fact that he is a secondaries guy and breads his butter there. And again, going back to how much success Iowa State has had in the secondary producing guys in the NFL, Kansas just lost 2 all Big 12 corners with Kobe Bryant and Melo Dotson. So if ever you were able to work some sort of magic, whether it's schematically or developing players, that would be the spot. The other area is kind of, can you fix the linebacking? Because Kansas has consistently, every year in the Lance Leipold era, had one of the bottom linebacking units in the Big 12. And they've had some good individual seasons. Like J.B. Brown was good last year for them. Cornell Wheeler, when he was healthy before he had an injury last year in the West Virginia game, he was doing well. But then after injury, it struggled. They just haven't had multiple good linebackers in the same season, and it's really cost them. They've started to get a little bit better against the run the last couple of years, but overall, they're just, they need to force more turnovers. They need to stop the run a little bit better, and maybe that'll put you better in better passing situations, right? It's just a little bit of everything. Like, they haven't been great at one thing and not great at the other. But if they can just be that's the beauty of having an offense that you feel like can put up some points. If they can just be, a little better, can it be a top 50 defense instead of being, 70th or 80th in the country? Like, that might be enough to, win 8 or 9 games in a season.
Well, we mentioned previously about Emmanuel Henderson. He's just one of the small pieces of, I think, Kansas has put together a really nice portal class. So sticking to the defense, I think there's a few names on this list that you could tell us about, Derek, but give us maybe the first guy, that first transfer that could come in and make an immediate impact for this defense this year.
Yeah. Well, I'll go with that linebacking core that they're trying to fix. And they brought in 3 transfers from the linebacking core. Bengali Kamara is the guy that I think is going to kind of lead that unit. Kamara was a productive player at Pittsburgh, and then he transferred to South Carolina last year, ended up kind of being the first backup off the bench. And as we see all the time now, after the 3rd or 4th game, he was like, nope, screw this. I'm redshirting and I'm going to transfer again. Right. So he ended up transferring in season, commits to KU. And now he's kind of being seen as being like the guy at linebacker, that he's going to have a different level of athleticism that they've kind of had at that linebacker spot. So that would be the big one there. But yeah, I mean, a couple other transfers at linebacker, transfers on the defensive line, like transfers all over the secondary. It's going to be important for them to hit on it, because as much as they lost last year, it's very easy to point to Kansas. Okay, they're 5-7. They lost all these players. How are they going to get better? Well, the transfers are going to have to hit for that to happen. And yeah, I think Kamara will have a good season for KU.
It feels like there's a good mix in this portal class. There's some guys that were big power forward transfers. I think maybe a defensive end from Texas that doesn't bring in a ton of experience. And then you bring in a guy like Kamara, who has a ton of experience and production under his belt. Like, do we feel like the Kansas fans, like we have a ton of confidence in this transfer class that they can come in right away and produce right away?
I think so. It's always going to be limited because, I don't know that Kansas is ever going to be able to get at like a 5-star transfer that's coming in. Like, I don't know if they're going to be able to afford that. So it's almost like you're playing Moneyball a little bit. And from that perspective, you're just going to have to hit a lot of singles, and maybe you get a couple doubles in there that drive in runs, right? And Justice Finkley, who you brought up from Texas, like that's one of those that you're probably hoping is a double. He's going to be coming in expecting to start at one of your defensive end spots. And like, he had some interesting production at Texas. He was more of kind of a rotational D end there, but maybe he can be a starter for Kansas and be like a really good player, right? So you look at that, you look at, the Bengali Kamara, like you just had a lot of solid additions. Trey Lathan from West Virginia was a starter there. Alex Bray was a rotational D end for Illinois there. DJ Graham was a former starter at Oklahoma and then had a good season last year at Utah State. Like, it's just a bunch of guys who they're not going to pop up on like the all transfer team lists that you see on a preseason college football magazine, but they're going to help you. They're going to help you either strengthen your depth or just get better, or maybe replace what you lost to where it's not as big of a fall from where you were the year before. And the biggest thing for Lance Leipold, he's always looking for like consistency from his guys. I think that's what you see in this portal class, that they're bringing in guys that raise the floor of the program and kind of the everyday and the consistency of where they can be.
So this answer might be obvious, but I still have to ask, what position group do you think gives you the most confidence? Like, what you're going to get out of that group, out of the entire team heading into 2025?
Defensive tackle. Defensive tackle is the one spot. They have like 5 guys that I feel like all 5 of them, I would feel confident if they had to start a game for KU. And then they've got a 6th guy who's kind of young that sounds like he's kind of starting to emerge, but we'll see where that goes. But you look at Gage Keys coming back. He was a former. He transferred to Auburn. Then he decided to transfer back to KU. He got a good amount of playing time in the game in Ames back in 2023. He is possibly the 4th or 5th defensive tackle for them. They've got Tommy Dunn and DJ Withers, who are both guys who have been 2-year starters for KU at defensive tackle already. Blake Harold was a starter. I think he's actually from the state of Iowa as a recruit that KU was able to get out from there. He came in, was like a lower end 3-star prospect, was somebody who you expected to be a long-term development guy. Redshirt's his first year, and he was already ready to play as a redshirt freshman. He actually on Pro Football Focus was like KU's highest rated defensive tackle last season as a redshirt freshman. So like you got him, you have Keys, you have Keenan Caldwell, who's just kind of a solid rotational body. So defensive tackle is a spot where it feels like that is a spot you want to rotate guys, keep them fresh. It's kind of just a question, will one guy like break out and be like all Big 12, or is it just going to be 5 solid guys? But I feel good about, that group maybe more than any other spot.
I think if my Big 12 team had very solid depth at defensive tackle, I think I'd be feeling pretty good about that as well. Let's get to the schedule then, because I think this is a really interesting schedule. And Derek, you mentioned it earlier. I have to ask first, what does it mean for Kansas fans to renew that rivalry and put Missouri back on the schedule this year? I already saw Missouri put up a hype video the other day. Like, the countdown is on to, I think it's September 6th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's everything, because at the end of the day, like, I don't know how much people know the history. Obviously you learn a little bit about it, but like, again, I wasn't somebody who grew up in Kansas. I don't think you really know it as well till you get here. So basically the history here is a quick lesson. This is kind of interesting. Kansas was basically, are they going to be a free state? Are they going to be a slave state? And they were the unbalanced number of states. Like, Kansas was the odd number. There were the same amount of slave states as free states back, pre-Civil War. So Kansas was going to unbalance the vote, whichever way it went. Kansas basically was deciding to be a free state. Missouri was a slave state. And so basically what happened is William Quantrill and a bunch of the guys that I think they were termed like the Tigers, their militia, came over to Lawrence and burned down the city of Lawrence. There's actually an old hotel on Mass Street now in Lawrence that you can stay at. Supposedly it's haunted, where it was previously burned down, right? So then Kansas goes back, right? And that's where like John Brown comes in, the famous abolitionist, and like it's bad on both sides. Like people are like murdering each other and all this stuff. So basically like this rivalry is set in real like conflict and families like going to war against each other and stuff. This is like real stuff. So it is a huge deal. This isn't just like, hey, I don't like your baseball team or I don't like your basketball. Like it's like it goes back in real ways for a lot of people. And there's been coaches on like the Kansas side, like Don Famborough, who's a former Kansas coach, who used to purposely, like after they'd play Missouri, they'd drive all the way back to the Kansas side before they would get gas or get food because they didn't want to spend a single penny to give any tax dollars to the state of Missouri. Like it's incredible what college rivalries are. I'm sure there's some fun stories with Iowa and Iowa State, but it's everything to have rivalries because in my estimation, like what makes college just athletics so great. I know we've gotten to a point now in the college industry, not to get too big picture here, but like it feels like everything's about the playoff. Everything is about who can win the national championship. And I don't think that's why a lot of people are into the sport. Like, sure, if you're one of those schools, if you're LSU or Ohio State or something, like maybe that is why you're in the sport. But like for majority of fan bases, it's let's beat our rival and let's go win some other games and make some cool memories. You know what I mean? And like, that is the lifeblood of college athletics. So yeah, it's everything to be back on there.
Derek, you're speaking on behalf of the definition of what we fight for here at Play the Fight Song. Just it isn't about the national championship. It's very well said. And I'm glad you gave us a history lesson at Play the Fight Song. I did not expect to get that tonight. So I'm glad we did. Well, if we talk about the actual schedule itself, I think the conference home games are really favorable. Like, how are we feeling as Kansas fans? Like, what we look at the schedule, sure, you get Texas Tech and Utah, obviously K-State every year, and you have Iowa State. But I mean, outside of that, the win column or the win totals at 7.5, I think it's very achievable with some of these home games.
Yeah, if you're looking at trying to bet the over there, get to the over, like Fresno and Wagner need to both be wins, obviously. I think you look at West Virginia and Cincinnati, especially West Virginia, which that'll be interesting. I don't know how they're going to be this year with Rich Rod. You get them coming off a bye. That's got to help you at least a little bit there. The Utah games and the Kansas State games, those are toughies at home. I think Utah is going to be much better. Kansas State one, you've lost 16 straight. So it's like, I have a hard time picking Kansas to beat Kansas State until I see it happen. In the last 2 years, they probably should have won one of the games, if not both, and they didn't get it done. So it's like, I don't know. We need to steal something from Iowa State. They seem to be having success from against Kansas State there. So it's hard for those. But yeah, I mean, you look at the road games too. Like, I don't know that UCF is going to be that great. Like Arizona, that's a good one to have to pull on the road. Even though I think Iowa State will be favored in that game against KU, and I think Iowa State will be good this year. Kansas does have at least the idea that they've won 3 straight against the Cyclones.
Kryptonite, man. You guys are the kryptonite.
Which is funny because this whole thing with Lance Leipold kind of feels like it got started by a butt whooping in Ames when his first season, I mean, that game was over after the first, 10 minutes of the game. And he has consistently since then kind of talked about that trip and talked about like the facilities and the stadium that Iowa State has for a, not Ohio State type of school, for a kind of more middle tier type of college, and trying to emulate that at Kansas, who's in kind of a similar position geographically and stuff like that. So, yeah, man, I think you look at it, and the beauty of the Big 12 is you can convince yourself you can win every game. You can convince yourself you can lose every game, because there's going to be like, if you have 9 conference games, probably 7 or 8 of them are going to be coin flips, and it's just going to come down to how you win the one-score games.
So what does success look like as a Kansas football team in 2025 outside of just, I'm assuming, trying to snap that 16-game losing streak?
I mean, if you guaranteed me, right, like if you said you could, even if it was 6 wins, but you're making it back to a bowl game, like that's the first thing. You got to make it back to a bowl game. But you beat both rivals with Missouri and Kansas State. I think any Kansas fan would take that at this point in time. But I mean, if we're going off like Vegas for, setting the expectations, sure. Shoot for an 8-win season. That's Jalon Daniels last year in college. But I do think the big ones are this: make it back to a bowl game and beat one of your rivals. And I go back and forth on which would be more important for Kansas because obviously the historically rooted rivalry against Missouri is more important. The rivalry with Kansas State is a sports rivalry, right? It's they're still on the same side as you, and it was Kansas versus Missouri, you know. But when you've lost 16 straight to your in-state rival, and like that matters in recruiting, it absolutely does.
Mm-hmm.
Like, does that one become more important than the Missouri one, especially knowing next year you get Missouri back at your place that you maybe have a chance to, get them back. So I don't know where I would lie on that question, but yeah, I think the bare minimum, make it back to a bowl game and beat one of your rivals. And then from there, it's at least a little bit cherry on top. And still at the same point, like I said at the beginning of this, don't cut yourself off at the knees. Like anybody should be shooting for the Big 12 title because why not?
Playing meaningful football in November, if you're a Big 12 team, that is honestly all that matters at one point. I mentioned I had one more question that kind of tied in some hoops at the end. Derek, we really appreciate your time so far, but I have to ask, like with the new football stadium, it looks like there's a ton of NIL support, not only in basketball, but you see it with this portal class in football. Where is the state of Kansas athletics right now between basketball and football? I'm assuming clearly basketball is still number one priority, but like it seems like the work Leipold has done has really bought in a ton of fans.
It has. And I mean, just the money that has to be donated for a new stadium. It's really unfortunate because had this new stadium, like if they would have done it when they needed to do it, which was probably 10, 20 years ago, they wouldn't be in a situation right now where like you see there are certain cutting measures that KU has had to, go with. And KU's still in a good spot, relatively speaking, with like NIL and, rev share and stuff like that. But maybe they're not in as good of a spot as they could be had this stadium project been done earlier. Turns out building a stadium is very, very expensive, right? So you're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars put into this where you have to keep going to donors and you're getting a $50 million pledge here and a $10 million pledge here. And that could be money that could be used on like, adding potential like all conference players to the football team or adding, that one other superstar player that it feels like they kind of missed on in the transfer portal in basketball this season. So it's like they're in a good spot, but I don't think it's going to be the best spot you could be in until the football stadium's done building.
Okay. Good stuff there. I really, really appreciated this. Learning more about this Kansas team. I think I learn more and more every day. I think this team can be a legit dark horse contender in the Big 12. Derek, before we send you out of here, where do our Cyclone fans go and find your stuff?
Yeah, for sure. Locked On Jayhawks at D Johnson Radio on Twitter. And look forward to that game up in Ames and should be a fun one. I don't know if they'll be doing a blackout like it was a couple of years ago, but that was an awesome environment when they were there. And that was one of my favorite games from a KU football perspective. I doubt it was the same the other way, but I think it'll be a good one this year.
Definitely looking forward to it. Hopefully, maybe we can snap that Lance Leipold losing streak. He's been our kryptonite. Awesome. Appreciate it tonight, Derek. You can find us again at Play the Fight Pod on all your social platforms. Check out shopnorivals.com. Use the code PTFS for all your free shipping on the best hats in all of collegiate sports. My name is Jake. We will be back again next week. Until next time, as always, go Cyclones.